My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. Today's business environment requires a new kind of leader, one with empathy and flexibility. But how do you bring this sort of clarity and vision to business? My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Jim Blake, looks at practical spirituality as the foundation for good leadership. Drawing from his experience as CEO of the 130-year-old spiritual nonprofit Unity World Headquarters and a lifetime in corporate leadership, he provides advice on how to lead teams, companies, and communities while maintaining alignment with your principles and integrity. His website is IamJimBlake.com, and he joins me this week to share his path and new book, The Zen Executive, Gems of Wisdom for Enlightened Leadership. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Jim Blake. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, sir. It's my honor and privilege to be with you today.
Jim, please share with our listeners your path, both secular and spiritual, prior to coming to Unity.
So I came from a very lower middle class family. I was the first person in my family to go to college. I did that by virtue of a football scholarship. And I went to a small liberal arts school that had a nationally ranked computer science degree program, which is what I was interested in. And so I graduated with my computer science degree, and then I spent the last 25 plus years in technology, in the banking and financial industry, in nonprofit, in the utility industry, so several industries. My focus was largely on networking and application development. And so I had an opportunity to work for some global leading organizations where I learned a great deal. And I also learned what I think didn't work from a cultural and leadership perspective during that time.
In a very moving keynote presentation for Unity's Urban Ministerial School, you share how a personal tragedy led to an awakening. Would you share that with our listeners? Sure.
I want to say it was 2015, and my oldest daughter, Brittany, had been battling cancer for a long time. She was diagnosed and went through a year of chemo and radiation. Came out on the other side. It looked like it had cleared, and she was cancer-free. And then a year later, it came back, which subsequently led to about a 4-year journey of just really troubling experiences. I mean, it was horrifying, if I can describe it that way. Her body began to shut down, and she eventually passed. She lost the battle and passed. And one of the things I noticed as we were going through that experience, sitting in the chemo waiting rooms and the doctor's offices and all attending all the different appointments, was people were struggling to cope. Not only those afflicted with whatever disease they were having, but those who, the family members nearby that were supporting them, felt powerless and in some cases hopeless. And I had served at Unity in 2006 to 2011. And so I knew they had a lot of sort of non-denominational tools and resources to help people cope with these things. And as I really began to look around and look even beyond the niche of cancer that I had experienced, just the growth in anxiety and stress and the more and more disease diagnoses that were coming forth, it occurred to me that there are so many people that are just struggling and suffering just to get through the day-to-day circumstances of life. And so it really moved me to want to go to work for an organization that could provide something to help heal or assist everyone that was suffering in all the myriad of ways that are afflicting society today.
And for those who are not familiar with Unity, please just give us a brief description of who Unity is and what they do.
So Unity is under the umbrella of a philosophy called New Thought. And New Thought really exploded on the scene in the late 1800s. It is a family of traditions that were birthed under that umbrella. And basically what you're talking about here, I'm not sure how they came how it came under the moniker of New Thought, because what it really is there are threads of truth in all religions. And so these different traditions began to weave those ancient traditions together into what they called New Thought philosophy. It's largely based on how your thoughts and emotions impact your experience of life. In terms of the nature of God and or the universe, if you're not comfortable with God, then there is an infinite intelligence or energy, and so we can talk about scientifically at the quantum level, that really underlies all of creation. And we are expressions of that intelligence. We're connected to that intelligence. And as a result, we have access to that divine intelligence through prayer and meditation. And so it's non-denominational. And again, a lot of these truths can be found in a lot of the ancient wisdom. But Unity is a part of that umbrella. I don't know if you're familiar with Reverend Dr. Michael Beckwith and his Agape International Ministry, but he's a part of that movement, Divine Science, and there are a few others as well. Centers for Spiritual Living is another big family under the New Thought umbrella.
And many listeners are probably familiar with the Daily Word.
That's correct. It is a 95-year-old publication that was started by Unity again in the late 1800s. It is a daily devotional where you are provided with sort of an affirmation for the day, and then there's a short paragraph about that affirmation and how you can practically put it to use in your life, and then it closes with a Christian scripture for those who lean towards that tradition.
And in my experience, I'm certain with yours also, in my training through interfaith ministry, at the foundation of virtually every religion is the same basic message: love thy neighbor as thyself, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you.
That is correct.
And you can find that in virtually every faith and every religion. So it's a wonderful concept that you're sharing with us. In a world where so many have left the traditional faith paradigms, and many describe themselves as nuns, having no religious affiliation, Unity advocates practical spirituality. What is practical spirituality, and how may we embrace it?
Yeah, so again, at the root of it, is, as I mentioned, how your thoughts and emotions sort of shape your experience of life. And you can really change your experience of life when you can get in touch with that. And not only that, but this understanding that you are not your thoughts. I didn't know this for a long time, Victor, but I thought I was the only person in the world that had this chattering mind that was nonstop, right? often critical, during my spiritual seeking and journey, I uncovered that everyone has this, and that I am not that. In fact, I am something that is consciousness behind that. And the more I was able to then apply sort of the practices of changing my thoughts and changing how I feel when things come up, or as Viktor Frankl says, there's a space between stimulus and response, where we can choose how we're going to react. And so the more I became conscious about that aspect of my being and my consciousness, the more I am able to really change the experience of life. So again, it's all about how we respond to these things that come up. And Unity and others provide tools and resources to help you address your response from a spiritual perspective. I hope that's not too general, and I hope that helps.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Your new book is entitled The Zen Executive, Gems of Wisdom for Enlightened Leadership. Many of our listeners are familiar with Zen Buddhism and have heard or used the expression, I'm being Zen about a particular situation. For those not certain about it, what is Zen? Is it an actual practice, and is it your practice?
So it is indeed an actual practice. It is a form of, it really comes from the Japanese school of Mahayana Buddhism, emphasizing the value of meditation and intuition. But it's really more used in this sense as an informal adjective, which basically means peaceful and calm. And so it's really about operating. Your posture in life is from this centered, peaceful, and calm state.
And is it your practice?
The Zen Buddhism is not. Although I have studied Buddhism in depth, I incorporate many of the principles of Buddhism into my own spiritual practice, but I cannot say that I am formally practicing Zen Buddhism, no.
Can you describe what a Zen executive is like? What are the qualities of a Zen executive?
Sure. So I think for decades in this country, we have, our leaders have led under the different paradigms of fear and intimidation, command and control, authoritarianism. And there's a different way. There is a different way that you can lead that is actually not only more healthy for you, but more healthy for the people on your teams. It's also more productive, not only at work, but for when they leave work. And so, a Zen leader is going to be someone who leads with compassion and empathy that I outline in the book a philosophy called servant leadership, which is really rooted in the principle that the leaders in the organization are there to provide tools and resources and support to those that are working directly with the constituents that are primarily doing the day-to-day work. And so being a Zen leader is understanding that, and also understanding self-awareness, if you will, of your influence. And I'll give you an example. Which do you think might be more productive, right? Someone on your team that is working under fear and stress because you're very demanding, and they're afraid to make a mistake. So they largely operate in fear and afraid to make a mistake, or someone on your team that feels supported, encouraged, heard, and seen, and feels like that you are really going out of your way to make sure they have the tools and resources to succeed.
That last thing you shared about being heard and being seen. How many times do we engage in conversation where we share something and the other person either opines or interjects and really hasn't heard or listened to what we had to say?
Right. And so what you'll end up with is people that are more engaged, far more productive. And here's the thing that I think we lose sight of as leaders. When you're leading in a different style that causes stress and anxiety, people can't leave that at the office. They take that home. Not only do they take it home, it impacts their relationship with their partners, their children, their spouses. It impacts your decision-making. Versus the other way, when someone works in a happy environment, is generally happy and pleased and satisfied and fulfilled by their work, then all of the ripple effect that goes home with them is one of a positive nature rather than one of a negative nature.
Which affects not only emotion, but also health.
Indeed.
The Zen executive includes quite a bit about self-care, from exercise and sleep to meditation. We don't usually see that in a business book. Why is it important for a leader to practice self-care?
So we take this for granted, but I always like to use the example of the professional athlete. So we've all been exposed to some form of professional athlete, and we all know that they have doctors and trainers and people around them that help them with their diets, their sleep, their exercise. They do all of this so that when they are called on to perform, they can perform at the highest level, both mentally and physically. And I think we take that for granted as sort of average citizens, if you will, but there's a lot to be learned there. So I talk about in the book some of the effects of not sleeping and not eating and operating from a stressful place. If you look at your performance during the day and you have a lack of sleep, you're dehydrated, you're not necessarily eating good food, and you're constantly stressed out, what I would challenge you to consider is, number one, you're not operating at peak performance. And number two, your decision-making is compromised. You might make a completely different decision about something were you well rested, in a different sort of mood, not stressed out. And so I think there's a lot to learn about how all of those things, the art of self-care, actually impacts your performance and your decision making, and also creates a ripple effect with those around you.
And self-care also implies a sense of self-worth, doesn't it?
It does indeed. In fact, I would say the most transformative part of my journey was when I began to really accept myself for who I am. And what I mean is, I spent a good portion of my life looking around and saying, wow, I'm different. I'm different. I think differently. I talk differently. I act differently. I dress a little bit differently. And for the longest time, I thought that was a bad thing because I wasn't conformative. And what I learned as I became just more comfortable with who I am, the more that I embraced my uniqueness, the more life seemed to open up to me, the more I began to get in touch with sort of what my calling was, what was at the core of my being. But I first had to begin to accept myself to get there. We all operate under this idea that there's a collective they out there that, what would they think about, what I'm wearing, or what would they think about me doing this or that? And there really is no collective they out there. It's really about us. And I would argue that each one of us is a unique, unrepeated expression of the divine. And that really is our superpower. And so the more that we can accept our uniqueness and really let that unique light shine, the more that life will open up to us in terms of what we came here to be.
I have to say that even though I don't think we have the same DNA, you and I have to be soul brothers because of our approach. It's really fascinating how in this work that I've been doing with these podcasts, I meet folks that by the time the interview is over, I have a sense that they're my family.
I'm flattered that you would say that. Thank you.
And it's the truth. It's the absolute truth. We come from a very similar point of view and perspective, and had felt like an outsider myself for such a long time until I recognized that I'm not. Self-care, taking care of oneself, self-worth. I've met a lot of alpha, super alpha leaders who say, I've got to be at my desk every day and available on weekends. I don't have time for this. What do you say to them?
So my first question would, and I asked this of all of us, right? How is that working for us? How are we feeling? How are we showing up to our family and friends and so forth? And I would argue that, again, I go back to the results of your productivity and your decision-making in that sort of space versus if you're well-rested or you take 5 or 10 minutes and meditate. And by the way, meditation is not some difficult thing that takes hours and hours. In fact, meditation is going to look different for every single person. Some people can get centered by sitting in the stillness. That's my practice. Others get still by being on a yoga mat. Some by taking a walk in nature. Others by cooking. Others by exercising. So whatever that form is for you, you should embrace that opportunity to still the mind. When you do, you open yourself up for creativity and inspiration. Otherwise, the chattering mind just sort of occupies that space continuously. And so I say all that to say, when you put yourself as a priority and you put these things as a priority and do them first, you will find out that you actually have more time, because what happens is the creativity, the inspiration, divine ideas, if you will, aha moments become much more frequent. Coincidences become much more frequent. You seem to be more in tune with the unfolding of the universe and in the right place at the right time, meeting the right people. And I know it sounds to some people like that can't be true, but trust me, I was the biggest skeptic ever, and I have found it to be true. I was that person you described. I had an executive role here at Unity from 06 to 11 to begin with. And I had also had taken on completing a master's program. And so I had roughly 150 people under my charge with a load of responsibility and going to school full time. And when I started my meditation practice is when everything changed and all of those things started to happen for me. So that's what I would say to someone who says, I don't have time. I would say, really don't have time to make time. so that you can get to a place where you can operate at your highest expression.
Some of the self-care that you write about is physical, and as you talked about meditation, some is inner work. Most of us have had bosses who weren't terribly self-reflective. What kind of inner work do you recommend for them?
So that's challenging. When you work in an organization or for a boss who isn't terribly self-reflective, some of the things I tried to do in the past were to incorporate. So I would repeatedly sort of submit ideas to the boss about team building exercises, book studies, or trainings that would sort of require some form of self-reflection. And when you put it under the guise in secular terms of team building or training that will increase performance or productivity, then oftentimes those that aren't very self-reflective will bring in that training, and then it sort of creates an opening. I'm not saying they're going to have a transformation, because not everybody is a seeker and looking for that level of transformation. But certainly the ideologies will make a difference in the team and have an opportunity to open the minds and hearts of those leaders that may not have otherwise been so.
My guest is Jim Blake. His new book, The Zen Executive, Gems of Wisdom for Enlightened Leadership. Jim, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your amazing work.
Thank you. So you can find the book on Amazon. You can also find a great deal of information about the book if you're not convinced at IamJimBlake.com. There's videos there as well as some detailed descriptions of what's included in the book. And then if you're curious about the New Thought movement or Unity in general, you can find information at unity.org.
And we'll be back with more of Jim and the Zen Executive after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hey, son, how are you feeling?
I'm fine, Pops.
What's on your mind?
I can't explain it. Navigating without a compass, eyes waiting, started to wonder. Metamorphosis, the loss of who you thought you was.
When your kid can't find the language, help them find the lyrics. Listen to the Sound It Out album and get tips and tools to start a conversation at sounditouttogether.org. Brought to you by Ad Council and Pivotal Ventures.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Jim Blake. His new book, The Zen Executive, Gems of Wisdom for Enlightened Leadership. In the last segment, you talked briefly about your meditation practice. You say meditation is absolutely worth the time and that it's the secret of productivity and creativity. Can you tell us more about your experience with it?
Well, so little known fact about me, but I am one of those folks who wants to do everything perfect. So when I decided that I was going to take up this practice, I must have read 17 books on meditation because I wanted to make sure I was doing it absolutely perfectly. And as I mentioned earlier, what I learned is there really is no perfect way. It's whatever works for you. It's whatever opportunity you have to sort of still the mind and create that opening or connection to the underlying universal intelligence, if you will. And so I started out very, I would say, baby steps. So 3 minutes a day, and then that increased to 5. And what I learned is the more I did it, the more I sort of craved doing it. And so my practice sort of naturally grew into about a 12 to 15 minute morning meditation. And that is what I do to this day. And I've committed to doing it every day. And it's the first thing I do when I wake up. And as it turns out, it really sort of sets the posture for my entire day.
It's been said that prayer is talking to God and meditation is listening.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. As I mentioned, sort of, and oftentimes I'll take a question and sort of hold the question in my mind before I begin to meditate. And I don't always get an answer right there in that 12 to 15 minute window, but normally within 24 to 36 hours, clarity will strike, and I'll get an answer to exactly what I was looking for. So I do believe that there is something about just being still enough and quieting that chattering mind. And again, the idea is not to control thoughts or stop them. You're going to have them. It's about noticing them and sort of letting them float by like a cloud would, and still remaining in that stillness. That's what creates the opening for inspiration and intuition.
Many of our listeners have a regular meditation practice, and as you say, there is no right way or wrong way. The key is mindfulness, being in the moment of whatever it is that you're doing, and awareness, be it in silence, or in nature, or admiring a piece of art. Often we see leaders in the workplace who project the image of do as I say, not as I do. How may a meditation practice be introduced in the workplace, and how may those who say they can't meditate be encouraged to begin?
So the way we have introduced it in a couple of places I've worked is to create a space for it. So you can create a space that is somewhat relaxing, far more casual, dimly lit, maybe with some soft music even if you want. But the important thing is to designate a space where someone can step away from sort of the day-to-day activity. And you can talk about the benefits of meditation. So we've had, you'll have maybe a short class on what the benefits are. You introduce the location where someone could go. And then what I've seen happen is it sort of becomes a grassroots initiative. The folks that really enjoy it will begin to group together, and they'll start to do group meditations in the location that you've prescribed, or they'll do it before or after work, or sometimes they all meet at lunch. But it really begins to catch on. The first thing is to begin to discuss it and make it okay. Make sure that people feel that it's okay, to be able to step away and sort of gather yourself or find a place to become still. So you make it okay, create a space for it, and then naturally, in most cases, I've seen it unfold without much more effort than that.
So the meditation break has replaced the coffee break.
In some cases, indeed, yes.
That's wonderful and a lot more calming than drinking coffee. When you say that the leader's self-care, inner and outer, has an effect on everyone in the organization, are you saying that when the leader is happy, everybody in the organization is happy?
It can happen that way, yes. The more centered so in most organizations, I think we all know this, right? It starts at the top with leadership, and that sets the tone. And so if you've got a caring leader who is also dedicated to their own self-care and are modeling those things, that makes it okay for everyone else. That's just sort of the way it is. People look to leadership for how they can behave and what's the norm and what's okay and what's not okay. And so the more that a leadership models self-care, models the idea of becoming centered, models humility, support, the more that other people will begin to emulate that. And so I wouldn't say that, the idea is to make the leader happy so that the rest of the organization can be happy, but more the leaders need to take it upon ourselves to ensure our own centered state, if you will, and then model that for others to follow.
I've known organizations where management is synonymous with misery. And to paraphrase an old saying, garbage rolls downhill. This means it affects all levels of management down to every employee and can result in a terrible situation.
Yeah, it can be toxic. And that's one of the driving factors for me, even putting this book together, is I experienced exactly what you were talking about. And I didn't want anyone else in other teams to have to experience what I did. And so over time, I tested the idea of being a servant leader, of leading with compassion and empathy, of being supportive instead of demanding, of trying to be inspirational instead of using intimidation. And what I found is people are far more productive when you do it that way. If you're looking for engagement, treat people, as you mentioned earlier, the way you would like to be treated. Allow them to be heard and be seen, be supportive, and you will automatically create that engagement because they're in an environment where they feel those things and they feel supported and uplifted.
Can you share a couple of bad boss nightmare stories?
Well, I can tell you this. There was a time where I worked for a boss, and this was really, I would say, an aha moment for me. I worked for a boss that was so demanding and really just so toxic that, and I was in technology at the time. And so in technology, you're often on call well beyond business hours and on the weekends. And I can tell you, I was sitting at home one Saturday, I believe, and the phone rang. I looked over, saw it was him, and I had a physical reaction. Like my stomach knotted up. I could feel my shoulders tense. I don't think I had ever noticed it before. And it was in that moment where I thought, man, this cannot be healthy. It cannot be healthy that I'm actually having my body is having a physical reaction to seeing this gentleman's name come across my phone. So that moment right there was sort of the decision for me that I had to move on. So I ended up doing so.
They say that confession is good for the soul. Have you ever been a bad boss?
Oh my gosh. Early in my career, I certainly was. In fact, I've told some of my colleagues after writing this book, I need to go back now and write an apology letter to all those that I led early in my career. Early in my career, I was that boss that I thought leading was bossing people around and telling them what to do. I had no real sense of how to be a supportive leader, but much more, I was command and control, which means that things could only be done my way. I had done them that way. They were successful. And so that was the only way to do it. And then add in a healthy dose of insecurity, which manifested as an overinflated ego. And I was just not a very good leader.
And that approach negates positive information coming from below.
It absolutely does. And I think that's one of the things that is so profound that we miss is when you close the door to information that can come from those on your team, you miss so many opportunities because they're there, they're doing the work. They can see so many opportunities for improvement in processes or how to serve your customers better or how to improve, a manufacturing process. And when we create this top-down or operate from this top-down methodology, we miss that feedback loop. And it is so critical to ongoing success and innovation, in my view.
You write extensively in the Zen Executive about creating a mission statement. What's the significance of a mission statement, and is that the same as setting an intention?
I think it can be. I'll start by saying I think it can be the same thing as setting an intention. But I had the pleasure of working for an organization that had a really compelling mission statement. And I watched how it sort of informed the culture and informed everything they did. And it really changed my perspective. I was like everyone else. We rolled out mission statements. We looked at it once when we were hired, and then it sort of sat on the desk somewhere, and we never really referred to it. And this experience at this organization really changed my perspective. So a mission statement that is short and compelling, that everyone can remember, can become sort of a touchstone or a guiding principle for everything the organization does. And if we go back to the idea of affirmations, which are, spoken words or phrases that sort of help us change behavior or pivot us out of negative thinking, but they can also set a course for where the energy of the organization flows. And so when you have hundreds of people that are all behind this same mission statement, all bought into it, and your collective energy is all moving in that direction, it becomes really, really powerful. The momentum behind it becomes palpable. And I would say the other thing is it can be really helpful because not everyone is going to roll out and be the inspirational rah-rah, I'm a great speaker leader. But when you have a compelling mission statement behind the work that you're doing, not only does it inform people from the outside looking in terms of what you're about and what you do, but it can also help leadership sort of have that thing that is bigger than us that we're all aspiring to accomplish, if that makes sense.
Yes. Where did that mission statement flow from?
Well, in my personal opinion, what I talk about in the book is I think it has to be a collective creation, and it really involves everyone. And you're not looking for a mission statement to be something aspirational. So you're not looking to create a statement that says something you want to be in 100 years. You're also not looking for something, or 10 years even. You're not looking for something that sort of doesn't provide any reflection of who you are as a culture and organization, and represent the people that are serving there. So, we want to be the greatest, whatever company in the world. There's not a lot of substance there. Versus if you invite everyone to the table, or at least have an opportunity to express, what you're going to find is they'll give you information on how they see the organization right now and how they see themselves and the work that they do. And if you make that your mission statement, now you've already got a significant portion of the organization that's bought into it because it's how they identify themselves and how they identify the work that they do.
Absolutely. One of the things that I used to do when I would teach sales and customer service teams is that they had to take ownership of customer satisfaction. And I used to say that if you take the W and the R away from ownership, you end up with one ship. And it's the one ship we're all sailing on together, and we sail or sink together. You have a whole section on how to enroll other leaders in this way of thinking. How have you done that in your career?
Yeah, so I think that is this is one of the most often missed opportunities that organizations face when they're trying to change culture or create a healthy culture. And so I'll give you an example. I talk in the book about a model called servant leadership. We've already talked a little bit about fear and intimidation and command and control styles. And so what happens is organizations will spend all this time and money, and they'll go to great pains to create this beautiful family culture and really, put the associates first, and then find out that it's not working. It's not coming together in the way that they had hoped. And part of the challenge there is you haven't solidified a single leadership philosophy. And so someone who's working for a servant leader in your organization could feel uplifted and supported and generally appreciated by their supervisor or leader, versus another part of your organization where you have someone who's leading using a command and control style or a fear and intimidation style. So now you're in the same organization, but you've got two people having a completely different experience of the organization just based on their individual leaders. And by the way, adopting a single leadership style doesn't mean that everybody leads the same way. Everyone will express that leadership style in their own unique way, but you're adhering to a set of leadership principles that are common. And so that anyone in your organization is going to have the same experience of leadership in terms of principles and actions and support and so forth. So I think it is one of the most important steps that is often overlooked And how we have been able to do it in the organizations I've worked in is largely through, again, I'll mention servant leadership. There's a couple of books we started with. One is called The Servant, which was then followed up by another book by the same author called The Culture. And those two, they're story books, if you will. So they follow the journey of an executive who is really struggling, who goes to this team building program at a monastery. But through his experience, you're basically introduced to the principles of servant leadership. And so here, one of the things we're doing currently is every new leader that comes in is asked to read those books. And then we actually have an 8-week book study led by our executives, where we sit down and go through the book together and answer questions and provide space to talk about the principles that are put forth in the books.
What a wonderful practice. My guest is Jim Blake. His new book, The Zen Executive, Gems of Wisdom for Enlightened Leadership. We'll be back with more of Jim after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
Look out, world, we're getting strong. The future's here and we belong. She can STEM, she can do more. Like build a rocket and watch it soar. Or clean the oceans and make the world a better place. Find a cure, invent something new. There's no challenge in the world that she can't face. She can STEM.
Learn more at She Can STEM. A message brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hey, Dad, your prescription will be ready in just a minute. Hey, Dad, your laundry will be ready in just a minute. Dad, your lunch will be ready in just a minute.
Hey, honey, why don't you take a minute? When you help care for a loved one, you give them as much time as you can. But it's just as important to take time for yourself. AARP can help. Find free care guides to support you and your loved one at aarp.org/caregiving. That's aarp.org/caregiving. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Jim Blake. His new book, The Zen Executive, Gems of Wisdom for Enlightened Leadership. Jim, must someone be a CEO to have this type of influence on an organization?
No. And again, I go back to it's sort of leading by example or modeling for others. Certainly, the greater position you have in leadership in an organization, the more influence you have in the overall organization. But anyone can bring these things to their work, these ideas, these principles, begin modeling them, maybe even enroll their teams or colleagues in some of these practices. And once they become, it becomes clear how successful they are and how well they work, certainly others will take notice, and you can begin to spread it on almost a grassroots level like we talked about earlier.
So I'm a first-tier employee in a company, and I see things that can change the profitability and the efficiency of the company. What do I do?
Well, I think you share that upwards, but it's going to depend on the culture and the style of leadership you have. But here in the organizations where I've led, we have sort of established what we call a culture of innovation. And so we call for that feedback from every level of the organization, from anyone serving anywhere, because they have a particular viewpoint and a lens that not the rest of us have. And so, again, I go back to the idea of that information that exists there that so many leaders either intentionally or unintentionally close themselves off to. So, and here's the thing. I did that my whole career. I've always run across those things, and for whatever reason, I just couldn't be quiet. So I would always run them up the chain. And I'll be honest with you, there have been organizations where it has been fruitless. The more I tried to bring ideas and new approaches and run them up the chain or share them with team members, the more resistance I got. And in some cases, I actually ended up leaving organizations for that reason. My creativity felt crushed. I didn't feel heard. And I also didn't feel like there was a sense of or a desire to improve or change the way we were doing things. And so that idea of sort of no growth just didn't resonate with me. And so in some cases, I had to go and find a different bus that was a better fit for who I was as a professional.
One of the things that I used to hear that would upset me almost to the point of tears was when someone would say in response to a suggestion of change, well, that's the way we've done it for the last 60 years, and we're not changing now. How do you respond to that sentiment?
So that and this happens especially in spiritual organizations or nonprofits, things become tradition. And so you have to be able to figure out a way to sort of preserve the tradition, if you will, in those organizations, while also bringing a modern touch to it. And I couldn't agree with you more. That is the phrase that is so troubling because that's where complacency begins. And it sort of creates this environment of stagnation. And I think if you look to nature, anything that is stagnant is likely dying. There's no growth there. And so the idea that that's the way it always has been done has to sort of be squashed. And I've done that a couple of ways of really the idea of touting innovation, touting ideologies, new ideas, creating programs even, creating something called the Fresh Ideas Program, where you're actually rewarding employees who are bringing forth fresh ideas. And the second way is to really enroll people to begin to understand that change is your friend. Change is not a bad thing. Change is a natural part of life. It's so humorous to me at times where everywhere we look in the universe, in nature and everywhere, the constant is change. If we were just to look around and understand that basic principle, change is a constant everywhere in the universe. And yet we as humans are so resistant to it. And so we end up creating our own mental and emotional suffering by virtue of our resistance to whatever changes. And so the more that you can really transparently communicate to the organization that, listen, we're going to change often. There's going to be a lot of change. I want you to accept change. And oh, by the way, we may fail, and failure's okay. It's okay to fail. It doesn't mean we failed. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It means we're going to try a lot of different things, and some will work and some won't. But the more that you can open the minds and hearts of everyone on the team that this idea of change is not bad and innovation is great, then I think you'll have much greater success in reshaping the culture to move past that "this is the way we've always done it" mentality.
In the Zen Executive, you have a whole section on failure and handling crises. What's your secret for that?
Well, from a failure perspective, it's a little bit what I talked about. For centuries, we've put so much pressure and meaning around this word failure. So if organizations tried something, if teams tried something, if individuals tried something and they failed, then all of a sudden the stigma of failure was attached to their name or attached to their team. And fortunately for us, in the early 2000s and from 2000 to 2010, Silicon Valley sort of squashed that with the idea of failure. They sort of threw out that stigma, and you started to see memes and people wrote books on failing upwards and failing forward. And, if you're not failing, you're not innovating enough. And it really became a mantra that began to infiltrate mainstream corporate America, which I think was so healthy. Because it really gives people the opportunity to take risks and to be creative and to submit their ideas and know that if they fail, it's okay. And so I wouldn't say that has taken over mainstream corporate America, but I will certainly say it changed in a lot of organizations and opened them up to another level of creativity and innovation.
From my personal management experience, I recognize the importance of qualities such as gratitude, praising achievement and growth, and forgiveness, both offering and asking for it when something is done in a hurtful or unconscious way. How may leaders of organizations that have not embraced these qualities learn to do so?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't know that I can speak to how many could learn to. I think anyone can learn it, and I think it is something that can be taught. I do think we're in a different state as a country and in society as we become more at least sensitive to our differences, our cultural differences, racial differences, and the divides that may exist there, which I think has begun in a lot of cases to raise everyone's cultural competency in terms of how we interact and show up with one another. So I think because of that sort of global focus on those sorts of things, there is an opportunity for more leaders to become more culturally competent, which will lead to some of the things that you spoke about. The practice of gratitude, this is one of the things that I find interesting, and another reason why I wanted to write the book. We're all on our spiritual paths very comfortable being grateful and having a practice of gratitude or even talking about it. However, we don't do that in the workplace. And so my question would be, why not? There's a great opportunity to be just as grateful for your successes and share that gratitude and lift up that gratitude, not only for the successes, but also the work that your individuals do. We have something here in our culture that we call Walkabout Wednesday, where our executives take a half hour every Wednesday and they walk around to the different divisions of our campus and they just thank people for being here. They ask them how they're doing. They have genuine conversations, and again, really just thank them for their service. And so it makes a huge difference. And there's some data in the book that I provided that talks about just how much acknowledgement can impact a culture. And I think leaders also miss that opportunity because it is a great way to really deepen relationships and deepen engagement in an organization.
The Zen Executive is aimed at CEOs and executives, but everyone who works for a business, big and small, can learn from it, can't they?
They can. In fact, the first third of the book is really about self-care, as we talked about. And so there's a lot around what you can do as an individual, whether you're a leader or not. Those principles are going to apply. And the rest of the book, almost every principle or idea, you can find ways to apply that either in your personal life or in your professional life as an individual contributor or a team member and not necessarily operating from a leadership role.
What would you like readers to take away from the Zen Executive?
Gosh, that there's a better way, that whether you're a leader or not, there's a better way to lead or interact with your associates. And it's with this idea of empathy and compassion, and still be as productive. And the second part of it would be understanding your own particular influence, whether you're a leader or not, how you show up, your actions, your thoughts, your words, how they impact those around you, both at work, at home, and really anywhere that you go. And so understanding that influence and creating an environment where that is one of a positive influence rather than a negative influence, that's what I hope people will take away from the book.
My guest is Jim Blake. His book, The Zen Executive, Gems of Wisdom for Enlightened Leadership. Jim, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your work.
Sure. So the book is available on Amazon, also at IamJimBlake.com. There's a great deal of information about myself and the book there. And then, of course, you can find out more about the work that Unity does and buy the book at unity.org.
Jim, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this very important message.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.